Hello again, and welcome to Pop Culture Therapy. I am Advent Nebula.
I am Cruellica Kain.
And it's been a hectic few weeks for us since we've done our last episode. And, wow, the things that have happened recently.
Well, and that's the crazy thing. It's not just been hectic for us personally, but it's also been crazy in the world. It's hard to want to do a video or podcast or video for Kaiji Okami when you see such depressing things going on in not pop culture, but in the world. So we wanted to kind of take a break from what we normally do and still do a pop culture therapy session, but we're going to do it a little bit different.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to go, and we're going to be taking what this episode is going on about. We're going to harken back to the 80s, the 90s, and just what's gone on with culture itself on a very specific topic today.
So we're going to look at, I'm going to put it into 3 buckets. We're going to do violence. We're going to do what seems to be the reasoning for escalating violence, and the scapegoating that's been used with regards to pop culture. And I say scapegoating loosely because, yes, there are certain things that do take it too far in pop culture, but to use it as a justification is unfair. So, to start that off with, I'm actually going to go a little bit further back than the 80s. I'm going to go to the era of serial killers. And that's, while serial killers have always existed, I'm going to look at the late 70s, where you had Ted Bundy and the ilk pretty similar to him. And the reason I mentioned Ted Bundy is because it's the 40th anniversary of his terrible, terrible things. But he utilized pop culture as a way of referencing his charisma. And then you also have, which is almost the 50th anniversary, or is the 50th
It is the 50th anniversary of Manson family.
Of the Manson family. And the reason I mention that is because Once Upon a Time in Hollywood really referenced that. I'm not going to go too in depth because I think everyone really knows who Ted Bundy is, who Charles Manson is. And if you really do want to learn a little bit more about Ted Bundy, if you're not too familiar, there is a great documentary on Netflix that really showcases everything that's dealt with him as a person. But he utilized his charisma, he utilized his uniqueness that's very similar to what comes in with pop culture.
Another one, too, though, to go on that, we're going on 35 years of Jeffrey Dahmer also.
Yes. He utilized the early days of almost like, they didn't have dating apps because that wasn't a thing, but still utilizing connections. It's kind of like the dating show guy.
Yeah.
Who, after he won the dating game, got arrested for murdering tons of women. So the reason why I wanted to reference those is because pop culture has always been, sadly, connected to tragedy. And you can even go further back with the death or murder of Natalie Wood. You can go with the Black Dahlia murders. You can go practically
look in
everywhere.
the mid-'60s when the Zodiac was going on in San Francisco, how he captured the media's attention then.
You could even utilize Jack the Ripper if we went that, because he utilized media, utilizing the element of early day pop culture, even if it really didn't exist in the forefront, of creating this mystique of imagination. And I'm not trying to, and I don't think either of us want to glamorize it, because no matter what, it's a disgusting thing to take another person's life for whatever the reason may be. Now, in the 80s, which I admittedly experienced a little bit more than you did, not to really go too far in my age, but I was born late 1980. And most of the era of the 80s, the school violence, utilizing that as the first element, wasn't there as much. But we did have a lot of, at least where I came from in New York, we had a lot of murder, a lot of mayhem, a lot of things. And people would reference comic books. They would reference violent movies, especially when you came into the era of like Easy Rider or Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Friday the 13th. And then when it got to I would say the early 90s for me, we actually, myself and Kaiji Okami, I don't think he experienced it as much as I did, but whereas it's now becoming prevalent, we couldn't carry book bags in school for the most part very often because of school stabbings. We had school shootings, and it always existed. So the one thing people need to remember is schools violence on the scale that we have even today has always existed. And you've always, and not you, but the people in charge or the people who have the larger voice have always blamed pop culture. But I think that changed more dramatically, and I was out of high school at this time.
But for me, the big event of Columbine happened, where when the Harrison Klebold went in and showed up to school, and now when you think about these two kids, you look at their background, they ended up blaming media because these are two white kids from very well-off affluent parents. Now, my cousins went to Columbine, knew the two. They were very well off, but the parents were never around. They didn't do anything to supervise or anything they did. They pretty much didn't care because they were very well off, had very good jobs, and were out of town a lot. And they ended up falling into this crowd, and it's not really known what happened with them. They were somewhat bullied there, but it's not really known what psychology drove them to do what it is, because there's no answer, because they took their own lives after the event.
So the pop culture element that was accused at this point in time, and I came from a background that was very different than these boys. However, bullying, abuse, things like that, those types of elements, even neglect, which is an element no matter what pay scale your parents are from, if they're not around, they're being neglectful. But the blame went on video games. This was during the time where GTA was still kind of in its infancy.
But Doom was at its height of popularity at the time, and then also they ended up blaming their two favorite bands, which were Marilyn Manson and KMFDM, which I don't know how KMFDM when they're one of the most anti-establishment bands around.
Well, I think in Marilyn Manson, I think what really drove it is during that time, even though this was Antichrist Superstar era, because it was right before Mechanical Animals, is they had a... It's so weird because Marilyn Manson is the musician and the band, but Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids, because that's what they were really known at that period of time. They had a song called Get Your Gun that was kind of talking about violence. The song really meant nothing in comparison to what the kids did, but when you have things like that, the 90s were the rage for grunge, for heavy metal, for the revival of death metal, for the revival of industrial music. If you don't know those two genres, the latter two, death metal and industrial, we can absolutely do a podcast on that, highlighting pop culture in the vein of music, because there is so much. But those two genres of music, especially the latter, which there's a lot of arguments, is Manson death metal or shock rock, which that point he was more death metal. A lot of people blamed it because it was counterculture. And that's why KMFDM got blamed as well, is because while people in the know knew that they were anti-establishment. However, an outsider, which is typically why video games, movies, comic books, musicians get blamed, is because they don't research. They go for the easy, direct approach, and it harms pop culture. For Marilyn Manson at that point in time in 1999, he actually had to do a great deal of defending himself. There were a lot of articles, there were a lot of sound bites of him just saying, I do not condone this, not in my name. Yes, he is counterculture, but he never went through that. It's very similar to The Simpsons back in the early 90s when George Bush Sr., when he was president, denounced them, saying they were a crass, evil community. Or you can even go to more recent, like about 8 years ago, where President Obama denounced Kanye West for being an asshole. So, when you have people who have a large voice or a large platform, they tend to do this, and I consider it scapegoatism. Rather than acknowledging, not to justify what either of these boys did because it was horrendous, it was terrible, and having lived through similar situations that were never public scale because nobody died, thankfully, but it's always scary when you have an adult say, oh, it's got to be the music, it's got to be the video games, it's got to be the movies they watch, because they don't want to address, and they still don't want to address, why do they have these guns in the first place? Are there issues at home that are more substantial than, oh, they come from a good home, they have everything handed to them? Or is there an element of mental illness?
Yeah, and this country, mental illness is like one of the biggest taboos to talk about, which I find extremely unhealthy. If you have some kind of topic on your mind, and you're depressed or have anxiety, you need to talk about it, but it's become like such a taboo in our society. You can't express those feelings, and it seems like a lot of these people end up getting into a mind frame, lash out in some of these horrible ways, and it ends up causing a chain reaction, and then we get the scapegoating where they're looking for something to blame other than what may be the actual issue.
And 1999 was really the catalyst for this widespread scapegoatism. I think because it was still in the early days of the internet, which amazingly enough, it really was for public use.
Jack Thompson ended up getting a big platform because of this.
So many got a big platform because they utilized something that they really didn't know anything about. And in my frame of mind as a 19-year-old when this happened, was they're talking out their ass. And the other thing that happened, and this is my concern when it relates to pop culture and the scapegoatism when you have violence. I, for one, at that point in time, was very... You see pictures of me online or on past videos. My appearance, my presentation was much, much different back in 1999. Everything about me was very counterculture, very open, very extreme. And the challenge is, and the reason I focused myself more so than yourself is, I was out of high school. I was more of the adult world where you were still in high school, so it was a norm to be different.
I was going into my freshman year right after Columbine had happened, and just the immediate change on the focus and everything and the paranoia you started seeing, because I was in the same county, in the same school system that Columbine High School was in. So they ended up making it so certain rules applied. Certain dress had to be followed. Mm-hmm. You still had to have you're still allowed to carry a backpack and bags and stuff. And luckily enough, I was in a rural town, so we didn't have the bag searches and everything. But they were also very cautious. Also, very small town with a large gun culture in itself. So they're assuming that these kids have been raised around the guns and everything and trained on them. Very Mormonly religious town too. So you kind of had some etiquette you had to follow, even for somebody myself that had kind of a counterculture. It was kind of a pull and tug at everything that I had to kind of deal with for that. And because I kind of have a rebellious streak back then, still kind of do have some anti-authoritarian ideas still, I got a lot of pushback from the people in the school system. And I was expelled from my first high school because of my ideals and everything, and had to go to a separate high school.
Well, and for myself, after Columbine happened, being that I was that extreme goth appearance kid, I had parents crossing the other side of the to the other side of the street with their children because they thought, oh, well, she resembles the presentation of these other violent kids. And it was a very hard thing to deal with. And that's where the scapegoatism really bothered me. Now, I do want to preface one thing in this entire conversation, because I think it's important, because a lot of people are so very polar opposites in regards to this. I am not saying I'm anti-gun. I am not saying I'm anti-rules when it comes to video games or pop culture. I'm not against any of that. Being that I was raised in a biker family, which, if you watch the movie Easy Rider, just think of that.
Or Sons of Anarchy for modern day.
Exactly. And so I learned how to shoot a gun at a younger age. I know the etiquette when it comes to holding and handling a weapon. I know what needs to be done. I know what should not be done. So I don't own a gun myself personally, because that's not who I am at this time, but I've never been against it. However, and I'm not going to preach, and I'm not going to argue with anyone who is anti-gun, because that is your choice, that is your right, but it is so ingrained in our culture, it would be impossible to do.
Yeah, for somebody like me that does own a gun, I have opinions on it, but where I stem it down to is, I believe that anybody who owns a gun should have the training. There should always be a mental evaluation for somebody that should own a gun, and you should always have the proper training. Otherwise, I don't care what your stance is on whether you're pro-gun or anti-gun. I just believe there needs to be some rules if you're going to be a gun owner.
Now, fast forwarding, and it's so sad that we can fast forward, I'm going to look at two different shootings that happened within a couple of years each other. One, I think, gets a little bit more publicity than the other, I think, because of where it happened. We have the shooting in Florida. I think it was called
Pulse Nightclub.
The Pulse Nightclub. And then we also had Sandy Hook. Now, they're in a few years of each other. They're not right around each other, and I think they're actually...
It was about 2012 for Sandy Hook, and I think it was 2015 or 16 with the Pulse Nightclub.
Yes, and the reason why I closely lumped them together, but not at the same time, is because they're on two sides of the spectrum with regards to pop culture, as well as with regards to how our culture has changed and how the element of mass shootings has become part of pop culture.
I would throw a third one in there, though. Vegas, a few weeks after Pulse.
Vegas I was going to utilize separately, but yes, it's very close to that. The reason why I go with the two spectrums there is Sandy Hook, we have a children's school. Very young children. Not that it changes for Parkland, for Columbine, or anything like that, but these are babies. They have never had a chance to really do much beyond finish potty training. And then with the Pulse Nightclub, we have the LGBTQ community. And the reason why those are on two sides of the spectrum is because both of them have one thing in common. We have two different individuals that have utilized technology and have utilized that as their scapegoating means publicly because of elements of Columbine and previous elements. We have the Sandy Hook, who actually did come out and say he did it because that's what video games did. And then for the Pulse, we had it where he utilized technologies, mainly the internet, and he was a major player on 8chan, which ties into our current ones, which we'll get into a little bit. Had a manifesto, had a plan, had it very specifically laid out on what he was going to do, why he was going to do this crime, and I don't want to bring politics into this so much because we're focused on the pop culture, but he did have a political manifesto on there as well, which leads
into the other ones that have happened recently.
Well, politics is going to come into play with our current one because that has become part of pop culture.
True.
The reason why I also acknowledge pop culture is because we have both murderers utilizing pop culture as their scapegoat, saying, and we can also include, if we want to, The Dark Knight. Let's include that in this because he also utilized pop culture by going into
a crowded movie theater just a few blocks from where you lived at the time.
And I almost went to the movies for that night, too.
On the opening night at the theater.
So this was a very scary thing, mainly because Kaiju Okami and I were going to see The Dark Knight Returns. Rises at this particular movie theater that the shooting happened at. And we had planned, and 8 o'clock that night, we decided, you know what? I had a doctor's appointment. He had a job interview. We decided to table it. Well, the last thing many people knew is we were going to go to the movies. So we woke up to a number of voicemails by people who knew that by people who did not know that we decided not to go to the movies and had a lot of freak out moments. So the side effect with these is all three of these shootings had known about Columbine and hearkened elements to it, like later ones, most recently this year, and took advantage of the notoriety of a mass shooting such as Columbine. Not that they ever referenced it, so please don't assume that that's the case. However,
they've been a playbook since Columbine of what these people that get obsessed and plan this out. They look at Columbine for when they plan something like this because there is a breakdown of the way the police have handled it, and it seems like every time they have not learned on what goes on because it just takes a few minutes for this to happen and tragedy just strikes and takes lives.
Well, and that's where the problem is, and this is where pop culture has really actually kind of in a way failed.
Very much so.
To help protect. And I'm going to start with the American Horror Story. The first season, Murder House. One of the people who died in the house, spoiler alert if you know nothing about the series, but you should by now hopefully, he actually died because he committed suicide at home after committing an atrocity with the school shooting. And so I reference that because this was not too long before Sandy Hook, and this actually referenced Columbine. Even though it was in California, it referenced basically step by step by step by step of everything that happened in Columbine. The other thing is, and this is not to take away from the tragedy of Columbine because it was a tragedy, is there's so many movies, there's so many books, there's so many TV shows and pop culture, there's so much music. Think of Pumped Up Kicks.
Yeah, Pumped Up Kicks is about school shootings.
It's about a school shooting. As much as I love KMFDM, Me and My Gun is about school shootings. And so pop culture, not to say that the scapegoats are correct, be it the murderers using it or the politicians using it or the people on the platform using it, but pop culture did at that period of time, through that 15-year period, fail in addressing the atrocity of school shootings, of mass murders.
And I'd hate to say, but in a way, media's kind of glorified it. And now you're getting these copycats.
Well, and that's where we're going to go with the last 2 years. Well, actually the last 3 years because of Vegas. So, and this year alone in 2019, we've had 261
as of today.
So more than 250. Let's leave it like that because the year's not over.
Yeah.
We've had 250 plus because I wouldn't be surprised because there were quite a few after mass shootings. And mass shootings, I know we've talked about it for so much, but to define it, it's 2 or more shootings. And this is 2 or more deaths.
Yeah.
Not how many people have been shot, but how many casualties
and
there
it just goes to show you how desensitized our culture's kind of become to this, is that it usually does not get really reported by national media until there's about 5 or more.
That's typically it. 5 or more is when it gets publicized. So let's start with the Las Vegas. The reason why I focus on this is because this is where the mass shooting element actually got flipped on its head. So with all previous mass shootings, except for Sandy Hook, which I'm going to reference them again later because they're going to play in the scapegoatism a little bit more because of conspiracy theories. With all the other previous mass shootings, prior to the Las Vegas shooting, they typically had an element of either being race-related, being sexuality related, being religion related, being bullied related. Something in relation to everything different. It always had a reason.
And there's one other element too you would notice with these two. They were young, white males between the ages of 15 and 27.
That's a good call out. Because that's the other thing, is they're younger. I'm going to use quotations so you can't see it. They're more impressionable. And that's why scapegoatism was used so frequently, because of the fact that it's this assumption that if you're under a certain age, you can be impressionable, even though I really do believe, as of the age of 5, 6, you do understand the basic difference between right and wrong. So when we get to this one, this is where it really changes.
You had a 56-year-old male buy a hotel room, and I don't know how he got all that weaponry, all those magazines, all those rounds into that hotel room. And he set up a few days prior, before the country music festival, with the goal to kill as many people as he did. And we tragically lost 152 people to one maniac.
And so the reason why pop culture can't be used in this element of why he did it is because he never referenced anything. It's a mystery. And admittedly, I have an idea as to why he did it, but I'll focus on that after. But it's a mystery of why he did it, because there's no manifesto. There was nothing written. There was nothing publicized. His family didn't know. His friends didn't know. His colleagues, so on and so forth. But what really took the pop culture element is where it's always been against somebody who feels like they are being marginalized. Country music, and please forgive me because I am not a racist, I'm not an asshole, I am not a person who believes that there's a difference, but there is that thought process that country music is typically enjoyed by white individuals. That's not true. There's actually an excellent number of Hispanic and black.
The number one country artist in the world right now is black.
Oh yes, Nas X, which is a great song. But that's the one thing, pop culture element, that always made me fearful of, is he against white people? Because many of the victims were different ages of white males or white females, just anyone actually. But it made me very frightened for the fact of, okay, there's no known element that connects to pop culture. You can't blame video games because he's outside of the demographic, which that's not necessarily true, but the generalities of it. You can't blame dating sites because he wasn't on any unless he used an alias that nobody, including the FBI, can find. He wasn't an overt movie fan of violent films because they would have publicized the hell out of that.
He was ex-military is one thing we do know. And even then, that's some group you don't associate with doing what he did.
Well, no, you don't associate... And I don't associate anyone who listens to country music as being vilified or evil either. But I do know there is that stereotyping. It's like stereotyping anyone who listens to rap or who listens to death metal or who listens to pop music. There's always terrible stereotyping. And that was the one fear I had, is that they were going to introduce the element of stereotyping.
But with this shooting, they didn't introduce anything. They didn't blame pop culture for any of this. They have not been able to, still, since Vegas happened, figure out his actual motive for what he did.
But what it does do for pop culture, and this is my fear for years to come, since it is so recent, is how are we going to marginalize this act? Because, yes, we've had the politicians do it, saying, oh, thoughts and prayers, which I think is a bunch of BS, but my fear is people are going to forget about this. And that's why I really want to mention it on its own box, because there's no scapegoating, so there's no immediate pop culture element, so people are going to forget.
Yeah, and Vegas is, some people seem to forget about Vegas already just because of where it falls, even though it is, to this date, the worst mass shooting this country has seen.
And then, sadly, the reason that it's fallen out of publicity is because of our next mass shooting, Parkland.
Yeah. Oof.
And that's a terrible one. And I don't want to focus on it too much, only because it's one where there's a lot known what was going on through the guy's head, from the classmates, from what happened, especially considering he was an expelled student, and we actually have so many journals of his that they've been able to break down on him. But it seems like the more recent two that have been publicized after Parkland, and they actually happened on the same day a few weeks ago. I'm actually going to put an additional one in between it, and that's another school shooting that happened here out in Colorado.
Oh yeah, because that was just a few months ago with that one.
It's just 5 miles away from where I live, so I don't know what does my radius mean something crazy.
But yeah, STEM would actually fall in categorizing with our two most recent ones as well.
And STEM was a basis on bullying. There were 2 students that did this shooting. One, and this is the one that confuses me, and this is where my concern comes in because we're so desensitized, is one of the students that was a shooter was trans.
Yeah, it was. She's transgender, going from a girl to a guy.
No, male to female.
Oh, it was male to female?
No, it was a trans woman. And this is where my concern goes in. Because scapegoating, once again, was pop culture, was LGBT, was, oh my god, what are the effects of allowing children to become trans doing to their mental health? And so those elements really bothered me. Especially the last one, which is a pop culture thing only because of the guy who's in the office. Not even going to call him our president right now. He's the man sitting in the White House. He has thrown into pop culture spotlight because now you've already had a ton of shows about trans, but now you're getting so many more elements trying to showcase that anyone who is trans does go through a lot. And I actually watched a documentary about 5 children between the ages of 7 and 16 going through this process. And
they had some of the kids that go through this, the bullying that they have to endure, and even the adults don't seem to help them a lot of the time in the schools.
And once again, I'm not justifying any violence. And the reason why I mention it is because if the truth is that she was bullied for being trans, that she was bullied. Why didn't anyone help? Why didn't anyone look for warning signs of bullying? Because the downside is with bullying, yes, you can blame pop culture. You can blame, oh my god, they saw stuff on television about school shootings, so they're going to execute that. Oh my god, they watched a violent movie. Oh my god, they listened to violent music. Because they brought in violent music again. I have no idea why. Marilyn Manson was brought up again during STEM.
And those kids didn't even know who Manson was.
Well, that's because he's out of the spotlight.
Yeah.
But still, if in fact it is indeed true, and this is still not to justify anything, that these children were being bullied for something that they can't help. Obviously, I never want anyone to take an action that does exacerbate violence and take the lives away from someone else. However, it also shows that there are ways to prevent this if people pay attention.
And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Mental health has become such a taboo topic in this country that kids, parents, nobody really knows how to communicate mental health and actually search for the help they need when they need it.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to the Dayton shooter. I'm not going to talk about the El Paso one, but I'm going to talk about the Dayton shooter because of his manifesto seemed to indicate he had some mental health problems, but also had some really racist ideas.
No, that was the El Paso.
No.
Oh, I
the
haven't
Dayton
heard.
one.
Oh.
He shot up that bar because his sister was dating a black man.
Oh, I didn't hear about that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yes, I actually saw what was on his manifesto on 8chan that was leaked out around, and he was angry because his sister was dating a black man on her birthday and went out to shoot up the bar on her birthday.
So the scariest thing to me about that one, since we're going to reverse the two, because they literally happened within 12 hours of each other.
Yeah.
For the Dayton, Ohio one, I've been to Dayton, Ohio. It's a beautiful city. And if we're going to go on Marilyn Manson references, it's his hometown. Just FYI, I might as well put it out there. He wasn't acknowledged in this. Video games were the scapegoat for this one. However...
And they were using Fortnite for this one because the kid was an avid Fortnite player.
I know, which it really surprises me. Yeah. However, what really bothers me about this particular shooting, all of them bother me, but this one, when I was listening to the news, all that happened, everything that happened, the massive mayhem, the running, the crying, the deaths, the shooting, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
30 seconds. And the only reason that this didn't turn into the bigger tragedy that it could have been is because of the fact that for some stroke of magic luck, the police were already in the area.
Yeah, that's something you don't see, a response like that, or the luck of that. But it just goes to show you, it doesn't take very long for one of those things to go down.
And so pop culture for this one, and this is my therapy chair element for here, is I don't know anything about it, but the fact that he played video games does not mean he's going to become a shooter. My God, Kaijin Okami spent the last month playing GTA San Andreas. Do you think I worry about his capability of going into public and shooting up a place? Do you think I worry about yours, Advent, being that you play similar games to him? So using games as a catalyst, I think, is unfair, unwarranted, and unprofessional. I also do have to state within this one, and this is my other element of scapegoating and the failure of pop culture, and I'm using pop culture on the news media, is they're not glorifying the shooting, but they're politicizing it.
Which El Paso has probably been the most politicized shooting we've had in a long time.
El Paso affects me on a personal note, only because while I'm not there, while I haven't been to something like that, all that life being lost, especially the parents who were, the father was protecting the mother got shot while protecting her 2-month-old, she died immediately, and they were protecting the 5-year-old at the same time, and he died hours later. Their 3 children are now, because there was a 2-year-old that was with a grandparent, are orphans. All because a man, a horrible, disgusting man, who listened to our pop culture man in the White House and believed every word he said about an invasion happening, decided to drive 10 hours. And that's dedication, because I drive cross country.
From West Dallas to El Paso, which is 500 miles.
Decided 10-hour drive, why the hell not? I'm gonna, and I don't know, because he turned himself in. I don't care to know his motive. I might like true crime things, but I don't care to know how he could still continue to talk himself into doing this when he got there.
Yeah, this is one that I'd like to know where his mental mindset was at. Especially to go to a Walmart that is on the New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico border.
I was going to say, not New Mexico.
No, it's all 3. It's in El Paso. You have Juarez. It's just 5 miles. And the border of the state of New Mexico is about 6 miles away from where this Walmart is located.
All I have to say is that particular shooting was disgusting. And I'm not saying this is a white person. I'm not saying this is anything. And the reason I say that is because there's this thought process of the white privilege. And that pop culture has really exacerbated it as well. I'm saying this as a human being. Anytime you go out of your way to attack another human being or other people in general, all because you don't like the color of their skin, or you don't like the language they speak,
or their religion, which is just baffles me.
Turn the other cheek. Get over it. And my concern is the fact that they used video games for this in Dayton, Ohio. They used movies. They used the pop culture president, which I think is what I'm going to call him from now on. Not to connect him, but he literally is because of his damn Twitter feed.
I have another nickname for him, which you can actually see on my Twitter feed.
However, pop culture, with all gun violence, and I know we've been going on the pro-con, we've been pro-pop culture, trying to be strong and not being scapegoated. We've gone on the failings of pop culture. We've gone on every element of pop culture. But pop culture is a necessity. Pop culture doesn't need to be monitored like we need millions and millions of rules. However, if you're going to continue blaming pop culture, and you're going to come out and publicly say that video games are the litmus for creating violence, remember, Japan, Australia, China, England, and many, many other countries sell the exact same video games, and they do not have the same elements of violence. Japan has had a horrible tragedy this year with mass killing in regards to the anime community, which I would like to focus a full episode on that, because the Japanese culture for it is much, much different than ours. However, the one thing I do want to say, if I was going to sit in the therapy chair with every element of pop culture sitting right in front of me, do not glamorize any of these mass shootings. Do not create songs that make it sound fun or fanciful, like Pumped Up Kicks. Do not, and it's a great song, but it really does sound, I didn't know it was until about school shootings until like a year ago, and I was like, oh, it's so happy though. Do not create things like American Horror Story did, where you make it as a story point, but you don't actually admonish it. You just use it as a...
They use it as a shock value point, is what they did.
Exactly. And there's others that do it. The reason I'm focusing on them is because it's the most prevalent in my mind at this particular moment. But there's so many that do it. There's so many that forget that these are tragedies. Call of Duty. Their game did it with the airport.
Yep, with Call of Modern Warfare 2 with the Russian airport. And they were glorifying you taking on a terror attack. That
you were the terrorists killing dozens upon dozens of people. And you actually had to beat the mission doing that to continue the story. So yes, I do think in a way certain video games are a catalyst for bad behavior because they glamorize it. But on a whole, pop culture is trying to showcase that these are bad acts, that these are bad things, that they should not be taken with a grain of salt. And if you do want to see something positive, in my opinion, read the article about the husband from El Paso, his last name is Bosco, whose wife died by the shooter, and people from around the country attended her funeral to give him support, which I thought was a very beautiful send-off that I think should be publicized in pop culture. The young man at STEM school who gave his life to help other kids run away or be protected by holding a door shut, even though he was rampaged with bullets, he should be publicized as a hero. He should not be forgotten.
Yeah, we have, and to end this on, we just have this problem with glorifying the perpetrators of the horrible acts, looking for a reason, instead of looking at the people that are the actual heroes in this situation, which we should actually be the ones acknowledging.
And so, if nothing else, at the end of it all, pop culture is not the villain. Pop culture is like a child that needs to be taught. And that's why I know Avid Nebula loves pop culture so much, because it's a growing amalgamation of so much creativity. However, my soapbox for a moment, and you can have your soapbox moment after, is acknowledge that for any of these shooters, no matter what people may say, mental illness was there. 100%. Also, as I mentioned earlier on the podcast, I'm not anti-gun, but smarter gun laws. There is no reason that this man, or any of these shooters, especially the Las Vegas shooter, should be able to walk around with hundreds of guns. If you want to keep them in a case as almost like antiques or something that you look at, that's your choice. But the moment you want to take them out, you should have to have a permit beyond your concealed carry or your right to carry license. Because that should only be licensed to the one gun that you're going to carry, not to the amalgamation of every gun you want to carry.
And for my soapbox, I want people to understand that if you see somebody in a situation that looks like they need somebody to talk to, try to be that person. Maybe you aren't the one that they need to talk to. Maybe you can figure out a way to get this person the kind of help they need for their mental illness and lead them on the right path. Because if you're there or can help get that support structure for them, they're more than likely to respond to it. Now, as I said earlier, I have a gun. I believe in the gun laws that we need to have that end up making it so. Background check, training, all the stuff that would actually help improve the situation. Because we have way too many guns in this country that are getting out there and getting into the wrong hands. Now, however we can do that, I don't have the answer. But there are people out there smarter than me that could figure out a way. It's just we've got to a point where we're just so desensitized and immune to the situation that we kind of want to forget it.
Yes, that's the great way of saying it, especially when we come to the point where we've had more than 250 shootings and we're mid-August. That means we need to look at this, and thoughts and prayers are not the answer, pop culture president. And we need people to be able to come together and stay positive and stay strong in the face of adversity. And if you see something that doesn't appear right with another human being and you don't feel comfortable approaching them, tell someone. Don't let this ever just blindly occur.
And with that, we will end this episode of Pop Culture Therapy and get out of the chair. But next time, we'll have a more lighthearted topic.
Yes, we're going to be talking about series of any sort, being music, movies, books, what have you, that left an emotional impact and stick with us. So hopefully you enjoyed this podcast or learned something from this podcast. Or if you have any comments, feedback, concerns, anything, please put them in the comments below. And if you ever feel alone and you need to talk, we are just on the other side of that email. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.